Hey guys, it's Taylor with a Traveling Taylor, and I wanted to talk about train travel in the United States. I usually think about taking the train when I am in Europe, and especially in Europe and in other countries, and it's not something that in the United States, especially in the South where I'm from, that we think about taking the train very often. But before I started traveling, I sold my car, and so I don't have a way to get around. But I needed to come up here to Oklahoma, where I currently am, and I'm enjoying a nice fall day. And I needed to get up here, and everyone asking me, how are you going to get there? I was like, well, I could take the train, I could take a bus, I could fly. There's really a lot of options of ways to get up here. It's only about 3.5 hours from where I am in Texas. And so I decided to take the Amtrak train. So you can take the Amtrak all over the United States. They do some really cool trips through like national parks and some really, really beautiful landscapes. So if you're ever traveling through the US and you have some time, I definitely recommend looking at Amtrak because they have really great facilities, routes, and the prices are actually pretty good as well, because flying in the US is really not that cheap, especially compared to some other countries around the world, and so prices to travel around here can get high. So Amtrak is a great option. So I just wanted to jump on here and talk about my personal experience. This is my third time taking the Amtrak. I've taken it previously twice from Austin up to Fort Worth, and then this time I took it from Fort Worth to Oklahoma. So they typically, where trains start, they do have depots so you can hang out. They have Wi-Fi in the train stations. And then they also have Wi-Fi on the train. A few years ago, this was like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when I took it down to Austin, Wi-Fi was not on the train yet, but to my surprise, yesterday there was Wi-Fi. So it may not be on all the routes just yet, but some of those more popular ones, especially in the Northeast where taking trains a little bit more popular, you're going to have Wi-Fi. So I absolutely love traveling by train. It's actually one of my favorite ways to travel, and I prefer it a lot of the time. Especially in other countries, a lot of times the train stations are more central to the city, whereas airports can be outside the city. So it's a great option in different places. It cuts down on your commute and travel time. Even if the train ride might be a little bit longer than flying, sometimes if you take into account getting from the airport to your accommodation, it actually evens out. So purchasing my ticket to get up here to Oklahoma was super easy. I purchased it online. I was able to see the routes for the day, and I got an e-ticket. And then once I got on the train, I just showed the ticket to the ticket taker as I was boarding, and they scanned my ticket, and that was it. They gave me directions. They said, go to the left, put your bag up, and then go ahead and head upstairs. So I did have a upstairs seat on the train. When you walk on, there's actually a lot of space. So that is one difference, I think, from Amtrak to European trains, is partly because train travel isn't as popular. There are less seats, but they're bigger, they're wider, and you have a lot of space between you and the seat in front of you. There are trays that come down and pull all the way out so you can eat or you can work. Like I said, there's Wi-Fi, so I actually did some work on the train. And there's exit lights along the side, and it's just generally, it's a nice, very comfortable car, and it's very comfortable for traveling. And if you do some of the longer trips that they have across the United States, they have sleeper cars where you actually can do some overnight trips and sleep on the train as well. So that's a really cool feature of the Amtrak. So also on the car, you have a cafe, like normal trains, but there is a little cafe cart. They serve coffee and drinks and snacks and sandwiches. So, and that it was open through pretty much the entire journey, except for at the very beginning and the very end. So you do have the option to eat, and you can bring food onto the train as well. So if you want to do that, you can. So overall, I would say my experience with Amtrak is really, really positive. There are some downsides. So I mentioned earlier, it's not as popular to travel by train, and so there aren't as many routes that go throughout the day. For example, my trip to Oklahoma, there was one train, one departure, one arrival time. It was a little bit late here in Oklahoma, so I had to pick a non-school night so my sister could come pick me up. My trip to Austin, there were 3 trains in the past that I could take to or from between Austin and Fort Worth. So you just have to check the timetables and see what the route options actually are. But you compare to some places in Europe, especially like in England where I've taken the train a lot, there's just not as many route options. My biggest pet peeve really with Amtrak is that the speed is only about 55 miles per hour. Whereas some of our interstates here, if you're driving, are 65 to 75 miles per hour. So it's quite a bit slower, and there are a lot of stops along the way. For example, driving to my sister's house here, it probably would have only taken about 3.5 hours from door to door. And instead, from train station to train station, it was 4 hours. We were about 15 minutes delayed, but there was a lot of really bad weather yesterday. And then I still had to actually drive to the train station to and from. So the journey itself is a bit longer, but again, when you don't have a car, it's definitely cheaper than renting a car. It was cheaper than flying. It was actually, my train ticket was only about $30. So the cheapest flight I think I could have got one way was at $80. Renting a car was going to be like $150. Or I could have taken the bus, which would have been around the same amount of time, and I think it was around the same price as the train. Those are my options getting from Fort Worth to Oklahoma. Amtrak overall is really, really great, and if you've never taken a train in the US, I recommend it. It's not something I think we think of as Americans, unfortunately, but it's a really cool option, and especially if you are trying to go through like the Rocky Mountains or the Appalachian Mountains, or just seeing the fall, like right now there's just so many fall colors. It's beautiful. There are some really great scenes, and it will take you to some really cool places. You can take it up to Niagara Falls. You can take it into Canada. I've heard the Seattle to Vancouver train ride is really, really beautiful. So there are some really cool trips that you can do here in the States. So that's it, you guys. That's my review of Amtrak. I definitely recommend it. It has its pros and cons, as most travel options do. And if you haven't tried it out, check it out. My name is Taylor. I am here every Tuesday bringing you tips on travel, being a digital nomad, and working online. If you're interested, please be sure to subscribe, and you can check me out on Instagram at Traveling Taylor. I will see you next week.